Tuesday Talk of the Town. Steve Noxon returns tomorrow. Today, we're joined by guest host Joe Markley, veteran civic leader and former state senator, in conversation with special guests until 1 o'clock. Now, Talk of the Town on WATR 1320 AM and 97.7 FM.
Good morning, Joe Markley. Delighted to be with you here on WATR. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to sit in, especially for Steve Noxon, who's been such a good friend to me and just an outstanding guy. And to be at the station, which I first sat in this chair probably close to 40 years ago with Ed Flynn. This is a homey, wonderful place, the way radio really ought to be. If you haven't seen Broadcast Lane, it sits in the middle of a residential neighborhood up at the top of the hill in Waterbury. Of course, every place in Waterbury is the top of the hill practically. But it is radio the way it used to be and radio the way it's supposed to be, which is local and close to you and talking about what you like to talk about. And the station is like old home week for me. Tom Shute, we were just saying, I was in high school with him. Chris Fortier, have known for, I don't know how long, a million years. I don't know from even where we first met. And Steve and Barbara, I was just talking to as she came out of the show. We were just talking about A Star is Born, and I reminded her that there was one other version of it for those who are thinking about it. There's the one that Barbara was talking about with Judy Garland and the great James Mason, then redone with Barbara Streisand and Chris Christopherson, the recent one with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, which I haven't seen, but the original, Janet Gaynor, and the great Frederick March. Very much worth watching if you're into that kind of thing, as I am. Sometime I ought to come in here and talk about movies instead of politics, but not today. Not today, because I've got another friend here with me, one of my best friends and one of my greatest allies in politics, State Senator Rob Sampson, who's got a connection to Waterbury as well, of course, because he represents not quite this spot, but the east end of Waterbury, and has done so now for coming around on 4 years. So, Rob, how's things?
I'm glad to be with you this morning, Joe, and glad to be here at WATR in studio for a change for me. I'm usually calling in on the radio, and delighted to spend the next few minutes with my dear friend. And we can talk about anything you want. We can talk about movies if you prefer that to politics. But I'm sure that we have a lot more to add to the conversation talking about Connecticut politics.
Yeah, Connecticut politics is, I guess I would say, it strikes me right now as a rather dismal business. We've got a primary coming up in just 13 days on both the Democratic and the Republican side. I can't say I've paid too much attention to the Democratic primary, but the Republican primary, we've got two important offices, obviously the U.S. Senate race and for Secretary of State, which has become too important an office, perhaps. But let's talk about the U.S. Senate race for a second. You know, here's what I'd say. Dick Blumenthal has been a fact on the landscape of Connecticut politics for as long as some of these other people I've been talking about. I mean, I can remember him going back to the early 80s when he was I think he was an assistant district attorney and showed up on TV. And right away, I thought, this guy's going to be trouble. He's going to be around for the rest of my life. And sure enough, he has been. And I've always believed that Dick Blumenthal was vulnerable in the way, you know, they talk about a boxer having a glass jaw. If you could just hit him right, he'd go down. And I feel the same way about Dick Blumenthal, that he's very vulnerable. He's been a kind of a small ball U.S. senator. He just, as he was as Attorney General, he's always talking about some little issue that he can do a press conference on. But he's not somebody who, it seems to me, has a major vision for America. Certainly not somebody who's going to put us back on the right track. The question is there a Republican candidate that can deliver that hit? And that can break through. And I am not, I have to say at this particular moment, I'm not convinced.
Right. Well, you know, Joe, just talking about Connecticut politics in general and having served in the legislature since 2011, I guess I would say I keep sticking around because I keep hoping someday I'm going to get to serve in a majority and actually be able to make some real significant changes in the way our state is run. And it's a frustrating, cycle. Every 2 years, I feel like we do the best we can, selecting candidates and putting up a strong fight. But I do believe this time around we have a lot of wind at our back. There's no question about it. I mean, I think, I've been doing some door-to-door knocking because the campaign's really just starting to kick off. And I will tell you that I think that there is a feeling in the public that Republicans are going to do very, very well. I think the Democrats have overplayed their hand in this state, maybe nationally as well. I think the president's very unpopular. That's certainly not helping the Democrats here in Connecticut. And I think that, just the combination of the inflation issues, gas prices, the crime wave, these things are really, hurting the incumbent Democrats right now, and I think that there's a real chance for Republicans to do well. There's a lot of things I could say about that conversation, but sticking with the notion of U.S. Senate, I agree. I think Dick Blumenthal is a terrible candidate. He's never really shown in the U.S. Senate that he is a player. You'd expect a guy who's been involved in politics at such a high level for so long to be an influential character who's involved in the big league discussion with the Chuck Schumers of the world, but you never hear him in the same breath. So I don't know that he's liked up there, and he's made a lot of mistakes over the years. The Vietnam issue, you could write a book about some of his faux pas. So I think that the time is right, and I think we have a real chance to take him out. And I think any of the Republican candidates for U.S. Senate would be superior, although I would certainly lean toward the more two conservative options if I had the choice.
Yeah, well, me too, of course. That's where I'm coming from on it. And I guess one thing I'd ask is it's maybe unfortunate that we've got two conservative options and one moderate option, because if you're a conservative, you're saying I'd like either Leah Levy or Peter Lumage better than Themis Claridis on their politics. But the fact that conservatives are going to be split in two directions is something that people see as being a tremendous advantage for Themis. And I don't really know how it's going to come out. I kind of feel like none of the three of them has closed the argument exactly.
Yeah, I get that as well. And, such a limited population is going to participate in this election. I mean, it's a Republican primary. I don't know that it's going to have a tremendous turnout. And generally speaking, I would say Republican primary voters are probably one of the most informed groups that there are. And I'm counting on that because I think that information that they're carrying is going to lead them down the path of choosing a candidate who's going to stand for American principles and values. And again, I don't want to knock Representative Claridis. I served with her for many years, and she is a hardworking person, and she has her own value system. I just don't think it matches very closely to the Republican Party. We had several cases where we bumped heads when we served together and since. And it's simply a reflection of where we stand on the ideological spectrum. And, Joe, we always say conservative. Part of me wants to get away from that in some way because, that paints a picture that somehow the people we're talking about, including you and me sitting here, that we're somehow on some far right part of the spectrum or something. And all that I have ever done is try and carry the principles of this great country, American liberty, limited government, personal responsibility, the things that made the country and made the country great. I don't know that those belong on a spectrum. Honestly, I think every American and every candidate, regardless of party, ought to be carrying those values. And when they're not, it seems like we're calling the people that do conservative. Maybe that's right or wrong, but I think it's worth trying to brand that in a way so the average voter is not getting a skewed vision of what it means to be conservative. Anyway, Leah Levy and Peter Lumage both, I think, have tried very hard to make it quite clear where they stand on the political spectrum and that they do support those values. And Themis has been quite clear that she is in favor of a lot of Democratic policies. She's in favor, I think she mentioned common sense gun control a number of times during the debate. That's a term coined by Senator Chris Murphy. I mean, I don't even know what that means. And certainly Republicans know that means gun control, common sense or otherwise. She's adamantly pro-choice, and in my experience, she's done a lot of double dealing with the Democrats and compromising when it was completely unnecessary. When we had a strong position, particularly in the 2017 budget cycle, where we actually passed a real Republican budget, only to have it vetoed by then Governor Malloy. We were in such a power position at that time, and if we had stuck to our guns, I think we could have forced the Democrats' hand to override the veto. And instead, the leaders got in a room with the Democrats and ultimately passed another, big budget with big tax hikes and everything else, and that's unfortunate. So, if we want a strong Republican, and I'm afraid of sending another U.S. senator that ends up being, one of these turncoats on the big votes. Like we have
Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah, you could name them.
Yeah.
We don't need any more of those. We need someone who's actually going to stick with American principles.
It's funny that if somebody were to take the votes that you and I have cast, and most of our votes were the same over the years, you in the House and me in the Senate, that distinguished us, that made people say, aha, those guys are the conservatives. I think they're all votes that I'm happy to run on. You mentioned the 2017 budget, which we had such a chance to pass a better document. Instead, we made a deal with the Democrats. Part of that deal was tax increases. Part of that deal was paying off the entire debt of the city of Hartford to the tune of nearly $600 million. I think the average person in Connecticut would say, what kind of deal is that? Why are we paying off the debt of the city of Hartford? That's one case. The gun control legislation, which is not common sense, it's nonsensical. This is legislation. I said at the time, at least if somebody could make the case that this is going to have some kind of effect, but saying we're going to ban these guns that are painted black, we're going to ban these guns that have a bayonet. It's stuff that it's completely cosmetic. They sat in a room and they looked at guns and said, this one is scary, so we're going to ban it. I'm happy to run on that. One that I was attacked on extensively was the procedure for dealing with sexual harassment complaints in colleges. And again, that's a case where if people, not that the average person is paying very much attention to this at all, but if people were looking at what the bills actually said, they'd say, of course, we should be voting against this stuff. Of course, the state shouldn't be imposing on colleges, private and public, a particular way of dealing with sexual abuse complaints, which takes away the right of due process for students. We shouldn't run away from these issues. We've got to confront them head on. We got to sell the people on them, and this is what I think that why I like both Peter and Leora. I know all three of these people quite well. I think that they're comfortable with running on conservative issues. Leora is accused of changing her positions. I think that she's kind of a born-again conservative because she sees what's going on in this country. And, of course, she's got a background where her family fled from Eastern Europe because of the Nazis taking power and went to Cuba, then had to flee Cuba when she was a little girl when the communists took over. So she knows just how bad things can get in this country, and I think she sees too much of it happening.
Right. Well, Joe, you hit on a couple of things there that I think are worth commenting on. But one of them, I think, is that, we have a problem in the Republican Party, which is, what is the Republican Party, period? Yeah. Where's it headed? What does it stand for? And I think that divide continues to grow. The Democrats, you got to give them credit for one thing, which is that they understand politics. They have an agenda. Politics is the art of making the world into what you want it to be. That's what politics is for. The Democrats never lose sight of that. It does not matter whether they are coming off an election where they got killed or, they just wipe the floor with their opponents. It makes no difference to them. They move their agenda as much as they can every time without ever letting their foot off the gas. Republicans, instead of being proactive, have become reactive except for a few isolated cases like some folks like you and me who are also trying to move our agenda.
That's right.
And sell the brand of America back to the American people the way we see it. And that reactive attitude that Republicans have is what has placed us in a minority, in my opinion. The Democrats are making the case for what the future should be, and instead of making a counter argument to say, no, we believe in a world with less government and more freedom and more opportunity, the Republicans are simply reacting to the Democrats, and sometimes reacting by compromising with them or just simply going along rather than have the fight. And that's a mistake, because I believe that our value system as Republicans is every bit as strong, in fact, far stronger than what the Democrats stand for. And if we went out completely unafraid and sold the ideas of American, liberty and freedom to people, we would win every election. I believe that in my heart. I try and use myself as an example. Joe, you're another example. We've been successful in our political endeavors in places where you would think that that's not even possible. I don't know. I'm going to continue to push for that. This primary election to me is a test to see what Republican primary voters think about that exact question.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you were talking about the tendency to compromise, I really feel like the Democrats have gotten their way because the Republican attitude has been the compromise is to do what the Democrats want, but not do quite as much of it. And the Democrats keep coming back and taking more and taking more. So the budget we were talking about, for instance, that included tax hikes. I usually say, no, we're not going to increase taxes. To say we didn't increase taxes as much as the other guys wanted us to is not moving the ball in the right direction. It's just saying you're only going to move it 4 yards instead of moving it 8 yards. That's not the way to save the country. And it's not the way to win, because what are people getting by voting Republican? They say, I voted Republican and I still got a tax hike. These people still went along with it. And yet the number of Republicans that stood up on that vote, for instance, was very small. The same with the gun legislation. And somebody said, this is the end. Here it is. This is gun control. We've got it all. You'd feel like maybe there's something to talk about then. But if it's just a matter of saying we're going to take a little bit this time and come back and take a little bit more and take a little bit more, then you say, at some point, hey, I'm tired of having you take it. I'm saying no to it, and we're going to hold the line on it at this point. And that's what I'd like to see. Hey, incidentally, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, if you'd like to join the conversation with myself, Joe Markley, and Rob Sampson, we are here at 203-757-1320. Anyone listening probably knows the number by now, but I'll say it one more time. 203-757-1320. This is Joe Markley sitting in for Steve Noxon at the wonderful and historic WATR, and we'll be back after a break. WATR sitting in for our friend Steve Noxon, and joined in the studio this morning by my friend and your state senator, Rob Sampson, from Wolcott, represents the east end of Waterbury, as well as Southington, piece of Cheshire, Prospect, and that's it, Wolcott. Yeah. A great district. And as Rob was saying before the break, not an overwhelmingly Republican district by any means. In fact, by registration, firmly Democrat, but one that both Rob and I represented and were elected to with ease, without fooling anybody about what we stood for, but just the opposite. All our efforts electorally have been aimed at being very clear about where we stand. We were talking while we were off the air about the 2017 so-called bipartisan budget. I guess it was bipartisan, but neither Rob nor I were one of the parts of it. And the myth that this is some wonderful budget that was passed because Republicans and Democrats got together. Watch out when Republicans and Democrats get together. It usually means that some higher and more entrenched power is actually driving things. And in this case, it was a budget that increased spending, increased taxes, paid off, had an enormous payoff to the city of Hartford. And what Republicans got for it was implementation of a spending cap that was supposed to have gone into place back in 1992, I think, and that I suppose has had some incremental benefit, but certainly not, to my mind, worth selling out the principles of the Republican Party, which are small government, less spending, lower taxes.
Yeah, it's probably inside baseball to keep talking about a budget from 5 or 6 years ago, but I got to tell you, Joe, I do appreciate setting the record straight on that subject because it's something that comes up a lot, actually, in Republican politics these days, and I've seen many of my Republican colleagues running on the notion that somehow we did a bipartisan budget back in 2017. And in fact, at the time, there was a point made to not call it the bipartisan budget because there was a bipartisan budget that was passed where a few Democrats had crossed over to join Republicans to pass a budget because the Democrats couldn't manage to put one together themselves. And that budget, had it passed, would have been a truly bipartisan budget, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And one that actually we would be better off today as a result of. The thing that they're calling the bipartisan budget now was known at the time as the compromise budget. And that tells the whole story. And as Joe mentioned, $550 million in relief for the city of Hartford is just one of the main things that was wrong with that. It was also the final death blow to the property tax credit on your income tax.
Right.
Yeah, if I remember, back when I got elected for the very first time to the State House in 2010, that property tax credit was $500. You'd be able to write off $500 of your property tax, that you paid back on your income tax. And then Malloy succeeded in dropping that to $300, and then to $250, and then offering it to seniors. And then in 2017, they just kind of like gutted it, and got rid of the thing. That is a $250 tax hike to the majority of Connecticut residents. To say that there's no taxes in that is just an absurdity, and I appreciate putting it on the record.
That should have been a deal breaker for Republicans right there, as well as the payment for the city of Hartford, which was a case of saying, let's reward fiscal irresponsibility. And the city of Hartford, of course, the city that I was talking to one of my Republican friends in Hartford, and he said, well, it's time for us to start borrowing again because we don't have any debt. So let's get into debt now, especially when we see the interest rates going up. Right? Let's get into that market and borrow some money. Hey, you were talking about the budget that passed before. That was maybe the most exciting moment, actually, of sitting in the Senate chamber that I ever had, because the Republicans offered this budget alternative, and I sat next to Joan Hartley, which was delightful. I really liked Joan. She was very helpful to me over the years in understanding the labyrinth of Waterbury politics. And I could see her furiously writing notes, and I thought, I wonder what she's so wrapped up about, what's going on. And then Paul Doyle got up, and I rather quickly could tell that he was making a case for voting for this budget. And so Paul Doyle, Joan Hartley courageously, and what was her name? The senator from Milford, slips my aging mind. Anyways, the three of them joined the Republicans and passed it, and then the momentum of that took it through the House as well, and the governor vetoed it. That was the high water mark of Republican influence in Connecticut, and unfortunately we backed away from it instead of seizing the moment. So, hey, we got a caller on the line, so let's see what's on his mind. Cliff, are you there?
Yeah, hey, thanks for taking my call, Joe, and good morning, Rob. Listen, here's the problem, in my opinion, and you haven't mentioned it, the value of the black vote. And the Republican Party on a national level and on a state level, locally, are not putting blacks in key positions. Now, Bob, matter of fact, let me backtrack. Steve does an excellent job, and I agree with him, critiquing and criticizing Ned Lamont as governor. He's absolutely right. However, now you have Bob Stefanowski running, but then the only person that you have black, in this whole campaign for the Republican Party is George Logan, and he's opposing Johanna Hayes. Now, quite frankly, my opinion, George is going to lose. Johanna Hayes has been the first black woman in this district to become Congresswoman, and she was a teacher. So now let me ask you a question before I go on and end and conclude. What was the highest ranking black in the state of Connecticut that was Republican? You need a little bit more time?
No, well, I don't. Hey, what's the highest ranking Republican in the state of Connecticut that was a Republican?
No,
there haven't been.
No, black.
But I mean, the point is, we haven't had a Republican statewide office holder since Jody Rell. And we haven't had a Republican win on the underticket since Pauline Keyser. So it's not like there's been a lot of statewide Republican officials, black, white, yellow, brown, or whatever. And we had a Republican congressman, of course, from this district, Gary Franks. So,
exactly. Bingo. You got it. And how long has that been? So the point I'm making is that there's no blacks in key positions, and you're not attracting blacks in key positions in the Republican Party.
Hey, my point, Cliff, is there's no Republicans in key positions, so you can't blame us for not having blacks when we can't elect anybody.
Right, because the Democrats are promoting and putting black people in key positions, and so they're going to get the black vote.
Well,
and again, to my point.
Yeah. Also, you could say, it's somehow it's not fair that we've got two black candidates running against each other. But George Logan was certainly embraced by the Republican Party. It's funny. I was saying that Joan Hartley sat on one side. She sat on to my left. George Logan sat to my right for 4 years in the Senate. George is a great candidate and a charismatic candidate. And frankly, I would have been delighted if he'd run for governor this time around. I think he could really connect with people. And I think he's got a legitimate chance. Rob was talking before about this red wave. If people want to change things nationally, George Logan might be the best chance that we have in the state of Connecticut to do that. So don't be, we're trying, and understand too, the principle of the Republican Party is we're not looking to say, oh, hey, you're black, we want to run you, or you're a woman, we want to run you, you're gay, we want to run you. We're saying, who's out there that's good that can do this job? And George is a good example of that.
Right, so why wasn't George considered, why didn't the Republican Party would embrace or consider George to run for the governor?
Well, hey, that was George's decision, frankly. It's something I honestly could say is something I talked to him about. And you can't, Cliff, here's the other thing you got to remember. There's nobody sitting in a back room in the Republican Party who's making these decisions. I wish there were sometimes, but what you got is the candidates.
Exactly, bingo, you got it. And how long has that been? So the point I'm making is that there's no blacks in key positions, and you're not attracting blacks in key positions in the Republican Party.
Hey, my point, Cliff, is there's no Republicans in key positions, so you can't blame us for not having blacks when we can't elect anybody.
Right, because the Democrats are promoting and putting black people in key positions, and so they're going to get the black vote. Well, and again, to my point.
Yeah. Also, you could say, it's somehow it's not fair that we've got two black candidates running against each other. But George Logan was certainly embraced by the Republican Party. It's funny. I was saying that Joan Hartley sat on one side. She sat on to my left. George Logan sat to my right for 4 years in the Senate. George is a great candidate and a charismatic candidate. And frankly, I would have been delighted if he'd run for governor this time around. I think he could really connect with people. And I think he's got a legitimate chance. Rob was talking before about this red wave. If people want to change things nationally, George Logan might be the best chance that we have in the state of Connecticut to do that. So don't be, we're trying, and understand too, the principle of the Republican Party is we're not looking to say, oh, hey, you're black, we want to run you, or you're a woman, we want to run you, you're gay, we want to run you. We're saying, who's out there that's good that can do this job? And George is a good example of that.
Right, so why wasn't George considered, why didn't the Republican Party would embrace or consider George to run for the governor?
Well, hey, that was George's decision, frankly. It's something I honestly could say is something I talked to him about. And you can't, Cliff, here's the other thing you got to remember. There's nobody sitting in a back room in the Republican Party who's making these decisions. I wish there were sometimes, but what you got is the candidates that come forward that say, I want to run for something, and not that many of them in a lot of cases. And you got to judge from what's available to you. And believe me, there's been no barrier. I think that the Republican Party is delighted to embrace black candidates nationally and in Connecticut because, hey, for just the reason you're saying, because there's this sense to say we could reach out to a different cohort of voters that maybe are looking for something different and they'll give us a chance. But you can only do it. We had Wayne Winsley was a candidate for Congress in the 3rd District not too many years ago. It's not been difficult in the Connecticut Republican Party if you're a black candidate to secure a nomination.
So all I'm saying with this, Joe and Rob, what I'm simply saying, I'll end this. Johanna Hayes never had an intention to be Congress. The Congress Murphy reached out to Johanna Hayes. She was a Teacher of the Year, and now look at her. She got the vote, and now she's a Congress. So what I'm saying, that another candidate that would have been possibly the Republican Party that might have been a good candidate is Renee Coleman Mitchell. Smart. She was the former commissioner for the Department of Health. You know, Ned Lamont, and this is the reason why I'm not supporting Ned Lamont, and I'm a Democrat, you know, because of the fact that she was wrong, and she was wrongfully terminated based on the corruption, in which his wife with the whole COVID, whole scam. You know, Steve talks about that, and they were right. Bob speaks on that, and he was right. You know, why wouldn't the Republican Party pick her up and say, hey, you know, we want you to join our team, you know, be on our team. You could possibly even get more votes. You would have got my vote, the Republican Party, just based on that. But thanks for taking my call.
Hey,
give that some thought.
Interesting point, Cliff, and I appreciate the call. You know, this something we were talking about before was the future of the Republican Party and where our candidates are going to be coming from. And that's something that might be worth considering right now. I sometimes do worry that our bench is a little thin.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, if there is a problem with our plans to capitalize on the red wave, Joe, it's the fact that we don't have a lot of good candidates, and in some cases we have no candidates at all. And I guess my great concern is that you know, we're going to have this national red wave, and thank heavens, because I think if we don't resecure Congress and the U.S. Senate, the country is going to be in for a very, very rough next several years. But in this state, we are way behind the curve as far as that goes. And I don't know that we have candidates in every race that we could be competitive in at all. And in a lot of cases, we have candidates who are just placeholders or are not, raise the necessary money to run an effective campaign and so forth. So I'm concerned that even though everything is in place for us to do well, we may not have the results that we want, and that concerns me greatly. Just following up on the phone call from Cliff, I got to tell you, I mean, it's very frustrating to hear that kind of review of the Republican Party. As you said, Joe, there is no machine, there is no smoke-filled back room. There are not a bunch of people sitting around selecting candidates. That's not how it happens. It's a grassroots operation. The Republican Party is. We're not like the Democrats. The Democrats do have a machine. The Democrats can install a candidate. In fact, they can remove somebody pretty effectively if they don't comply with their wishes. In some respects, it's a great thing because as a Republican candidate for office, you kind of are on your own, which might make it hard, but you also get to make your own decisions. It's not like someone's going to come along and say, well, the party bosses say you need to do this. There's a little of that, but not like there is with the Democrats. The great frustration, though, is the notion that identity politics plays any role at all in anything in America. I come from the colorblind philosophy, and people will trash you up one side and down the other, or somehow that's a bigoted position. It's not. Yeah. At the end of the day, if you treat people based on their merit individually, and I will always do this as wrong, I don't care who tells me I'm wrong. I'm done with that. I'm going to judge people based on the content of their character, and that is it. And I don't believe we should be selecting candidates based on any criteria other than what value system they represent and how good a job they'll do in the position, and that's it.
Yeah, that's right. You know, Cliff made the point about Johanna Hayes being recruited. And again, because the Democrats do have an electoral machine, Chris Murphy could go to somebody like Johanna Hayes and say, listen, if you do this, I've got this organization ready to get behind you. We can raise you the money. We can put the political professionals in place to get your campaign going. I can supercharge you. The Republicans don't have that anymore. The fundraising is a very difficult problem. We're going to have a call in the 12 o'clock hour from Mary Fay, our candidate for controller, who's struggling still to raise the money to qualify for public financing. In the Republican Party, the fundraising muscle has atrophied. It's tough just to raise the $5,000 or $15,000 that you need to qualify as a state legislative candidate. And another thing that we are woefully missing is good campaign workers, professional and amateur. You run for state representative. You can't go out and hire somebody for a professional campaign manager. You've got to find somebody that's willing to do that job because they believe in you, they believe in the cause, whatever it is. But you need somebody that knows what they're doing. And the number of those folks that we have in Connecticut is very small. When we have a talented young political operative, almost inevitably they end up going out to some other state, down to Virginia or wherever, and where they can win and where they can make good money. And we're left with folks that maybe are not so effective. So one thing to say about that is there is opportunity in the Connecticut Republican Party. If you want to be a candidate, if you want to get involved in a campaign, we're looking for it. So don't hesitate to step forward. And Rob and I both have worked a lot with candidates, with people that want to get involved. Get in touch with us. Tell us what you'd like to do. It's campaign season. Now's the time to get involved with your state candidate for state representative and learn what politics is all about from the ground floor so that you can be a force, and a force for good in the state of Connecticut. We're going to take another short break, and we'll be back after a few messages. This is Joe Markley sitting in for Steve Noxon on WATR. Here on WATR. It's a beautiful day and a great time here in the studio with my good friend Rob Sampson. We got some callers on the line. Let's go to my old friend Nick. I bet I can guess what's on his mind. But Nick, are you there?
Joe, I'm glad I called you. I'm glad, and you know exactly what's on my mind. And I'm getting totally fed up with both sides, Republicans and Democrats. Start getting educated out there with the power grid. We can't worry about 2 more years till we get another election going and not open up those pipelines. Listen, I think we're talking about the wrong subject matters, and there's not enough Republicans or Democrats. They know what I'm talking about because 12 years ago I interviewed Linda McMahon, Chris Murphy, Celine New James, Tony D'Amelio. It's all on YouTube right now. I've been talking about this ever since I retired almost 30 years ago. If we don't get our energy game straightened out, all this political agenda on both sides is not making any sense. It's costing the country. It's costing the state. It's costing a lot of money. And without the electrical grid being addressed, you know me well enough, Joe.
Yes.
I'm not picking on any one person at all. But you know what? It's a lot of talk about what you're going to do and what they're not going to do. Right now, the biggest problem is between Biden and Trump. We're not interested in that right now. The public's not interested in that. We're interested in, I shouldn't say that, but I'm interested in what you're going to do with the pipeline, what you're going to do with the grid, what you're going to do with this power grid. All you people on both sides should start working together, kneel down before God, before something happens. We have a hell of a heat problem going on. Our transformers, I don't care what the power company tells you. I had almost 40 years there. So I'm backing up what I got to say because I worked there. I know exactly what goes on. I know exactly what's going on with this grid.
I agree. The funny thing is I say to my wife knew I was coming in today, and she said, so who are you going to hear from? I said, listen, there's one fellow, Nick, I know he's going to call me up about the power grid. And the thing about it is, Nick, I honestly believe you're Paul Revere. I think that we've talked about it enough that I'm convinced you're right about it. I was never in a position where I felt like I could do anything about it in the legislature. This is one of the things you have to realize about politics too. Just like there's no back room where the Republicans make all the decisions, and that's what's happened. If there's a back room in Hartford, they never let me into it. But I think that the vulnerability of the power grid is one of the. That's your focus, and rightly so, because it's what you know best. But I think it's just one of the extreme problems that's facing us as a country, and we've got several things that, if they went wrong, would have catastrophic effect on our society. And I think the failure of the power grid, which could happen just by its running down, or because of terrorism or some kind of attack like that, is definitely one of them. So I'm glad you're sounding the alarm on it. I'm sorry that you're not getting the response, but a lot of people have that problem. Thanks for calling, Nick. Good to hear from you, as always. Rob, anything on the power grid?
Nothing other than I think Nick's right in a lot of respects. We need to certainly establish a America First policy as far as energy goes, I think, nationally. But if you're talking about the security and safety of our local power grid in the state of Connecticut, absolutely. I have a friend who contacts me regularly about environmental forces that might impact the electrical grid and sunspots and things like that. The problem with this issue, more than anything, it's not a sexy issue. That's what it is, and that's why it gets left, untackled by the legislature, because it's not the kind of thing that engages the media and doesn't get enough attention. But Nick's right, and energy prices in Connecticut is something that matters, and we should be working very, very hard to establish a secure future. I think we should go nuclear. I really do. I think that's the answer to people that want to see more renewable energy, more green energy, and a move away from fossil fuels, but one that makes sense, that doesn't leave us incapable of meeting our energy needs in the future. So I'm with Nick on all of that. Let's secure our electrical grid, and let's find better ways to make energy in the future that is more cost effective for citizens.
It's amazing, really. Nuclear power seems to be a solution for so many things right now, and nobody's even talking about it, really. It's been, somehow we've taken that one off the board, and that's the one we should be embracing. Rob, speaking of elections, you're up for election, true?
Yes, indeed.
And so tell us about that. What are you doing, and what's the prospects, and what's the timeline?
Well, I'm up for election the same time as everybody else, which will be November 8th this year. It feels early for a lot of people, I think, because we haven't even gotten through the primary yet. But I'm just getting started as far as, going out, knocking on doors, and starting to put together my campaign. You know all about that issue. You've got a lot of work to do, actually, in a campaign. People don't realize behind the scenes, and much of it has to happen early. You've got to put together your plan for what your media is going to look like, what your radio ads are going to sound like, what your TV ads are going to look like, all that shiny mail that people throw in their trash when it gets there. You've got to have some mind set to what you're going to be building early on in the campaign. So that's what I'm working on at this point. I do have an opponent, although we haven't heard much from him. But I'm going to do what I always do, Joe, which is I'm going to stand for American principles and values, and I'm going to keep making the argument about freedom being greater than socialism. I think I'm going to inject some other things in my campaign, too. I'm very upset about the direction of our country as far as a lot of this, for lack of a better term, woke nonsense, critical race theory in schools, interfering with parents' rights. Transgender athletes. I think we need to get to a place where we reclaim our American system of values while respecting people's individual liberty. This is the thing, is that, it's easy to get caught in this crossfire where people say that you're trying to limit education in schools or ban books and stuff like that. I think asking for appropriate education materials is not the same thing as banning books, but that's the kind of thing, and I'm going to make a strong focus for restoring American values as part of the campaign.
It's not even American values you have to defend now. It's, to go back to a word you used before, common sense. They talk about common sense gun laws. Let's talk about common sense sexual definitions. I mean, that seems like the area where common sense would be most profitably and most easily applied. I said when we had a vote some years ago on transgender use of bathrooms, about who's supposed to be in which bathroom, and I said during the debate, this is an issue that for thousands of years government did not even have to get involved in. People kind of knew which bathroom they were supposed to be in. And it's that lack of common sense, even more than the political issues, that scares me at this point. This gender question. Again, even gender, it's like, when did we stop calling it sex? It used to be sex, MF. Those were the choices, and that seemed like it was sufficient to the cause. Hey, Rob, thanks so much for coming in. What's your website in case people want to know more?
My website is Sampson4ct.com. FOR is spelled out.